Hey, before we get into the episode, I want to tell you about something I'm trying called Podcast Club. Here's why. If you've been on social media, even at all lately, you might have noticed that everything is starting to sound and look the same. It's not about having real conversations anymore. It's about performing for the algorithm, and half of it sounds AI generated. So I wanted to try something different. Podcast Club is like book club, but for this show. Once a week, we'll get together live on Zoom and actually talk. What do you want to go deeper on? Where are you finding that you feel resistance? And how can you take what you've been listening to and actually apply it to your life? It's for women who listen to this podcast and want to be in real conversations with other women like them. If that's you, head to consciousedge.com/club. Pick the days that work for you. I'll save your spot, and I can't wait to see you there. Every entrepreneur oftentimes hears that the key to success are the people that they put around them, the support system that they create. And so often they opt to do it alone because sometimes bringing your ideas and motivating a team can be very frustrating, especially if you want to change things up or do things differently and you've got different personalities that are conflicting. And they talk about how you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So that's what we're going to dive into today on our Mindfulness Matters with Jonathan Duggar. So let's get started. Hey, you leader, entrepreneur, business owner, solopreneur, whatever you call yourself, we know you're a visionary business builder, wealth seeker looking to combine a passion for doing good with leading consciously. It's time to shift from a traditional focus of pure wealth accumulation to one that integrates well-being and fulfillment. You're here for a purpose, and it's time to shine your light. So here we go. Welcome back to the Conscious Edge podcast. I'm your host, Alecia St. Germain. I'm here with my co-host, Jonathan Duggar, for our monthly Mindfulness Matters. Hello.
Hey there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this.
Yeah. Hey, do you know what today is?
What is today?
So when we're recording this, not necessarily when everyone's listening, but today is actually our 2-year anniversary for the date we launched the podcast.
Oh my goodness, that just gave me chills. That's awesome. 2 years?
Yeah.
How is that even possible?
I know, 2 years. It's over 100 episodes.
Wow.
It's been really, really fun. And yet I worried we would run out of things to talk about. Which is...
Well, we haven't in the however many years we've been friends, 30 years we've been friends, or 20 years we've been
20
friends.
years we've been friends. I know, we should have. So if you're just joining us, this podcast came from 20 years of behind the closed doors conversations Jonathan and I have been having. So the idea that we would run out of things to talk about is ridiculous. But if one of the things that has been so rewarding about this is just getting to unpack everything that comes up around building a business, from financial and things that come up for us, mindset things that come up, strategy, like little strategies. We recently talked about you buying a business, which is so funny because I have so many clients right now that are on that endeavor of buying a business. So such a timely podcast for them. So it's been really rewarding and fun to do it. You have any thoughts around it?
So many, because that just did not have in my head that we were anywhere close to that amount of time doing this. If anybody already knows me pretty well, they'll know that I am very prone to shiny object syndrome, meaning that I love starting new things, new initiatives, and staying on task with something has always been a challenge throughout my life. And I think I have improved some there, but it still remains a challenge. So the fact that we have this amount of longevity and that we're consistently getting together and having these conversations, and if I may say so, I think we're producing some pretty good stuff. I've gotten some really great feedback. It's very recently, actually, about some of the benefits people are recognizing out of listening to our conversations and listening to your conversations and you and Jen's conversations and some of the others you've had. So anyway, this really lots of joyful bubbling in my heart just
Yeah.
thinking about that.
Yeah. So with that being said, if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you hit follow or subscribe from wherever you're listening. Okay, so we want to talk about change and mindfulness on teams, and specifically some of maybe the things that you navigate around trying to change. I think one of the challenges in really big corporations and what is so great about smaller businesses is it's like the Titanic trying to turn the ship when you try to pivot or do something different. And there's a lot of complexity and reasons that it takes so long to turn the ship. But when you have smaller businesses, it can be a lot easier. But I still hear like the thing that stands out for me, I would go all the way back to my college days when I was a resident manager. So I managed the office and I made it like 6 months in that role. And I'm not a manager. I'm not a manager of people. That's not my talent. And I remember we had to have residents sign cards like that showing that they checked back in from break. And so we used to put people at the elevators to catch everyone as they were coming into the elevators because it was so hard to track down college kids. And so we had set it up to do that. And I had one employee who had been there before, didn't want to do it that way, had remembered it that we did it differently, and then just didn't unmanned the whole project and put it back to a different way of doing it. And I had served in some different roles. I knew I was correct, but he unmanned the whole project. So while I was out at class, got back, and it was okay, that didn't happen. And it was so frustrating. I said, I didn't make it very long in that role because I did not enjoy working with people like that. But that's a perfect example of you're trying to change or do something more efficiently or differently, and someone doesn't want to do that.
Yep. It's so interesting because this is coming up. One of the reasons this subject is so timely is because this is coming up for me professionally a lot, where I get approached either through an email or a referral or during a conversation. And I cannot tell you how many times in the past couple of years, but specifically the past few months, that the lead into the conversation is, we're going through a lot of extensive change right now. We're in an upheaval. We have a lot of unpredictable things going on. We have some chaos in this particular team. Those kind of things that are all revolve around change. Well, there's a huge body of study and application around change management. And if you're not seeing any video on this, I'm using air quotes because that's actually, if you know anything about the subject area and have directly been involved in team building, especially team creation around change initiatives, the whole concept of change management, it's comical.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in the past, and this is something I just said to somebody on a call a few days ago, in the past, we talked about managing a process, and leaders were supposed to be very adept at managing the change process. In fact, there may be a whole department in a company called the change management team or the change management process team. Well, what we're learning more and more, and this has really become prevalent to dig into since COVID, is that it's not the process that's the issue. So creating a better process, a more effective or efficient process, that's not it. It's about the people. And no one is taught how to create teams with a focus on certain psychological aspects, certain emotional aspects of the people that are part of that change initiative. So it's about strategy or about approaches that help people feel safe and help people feel integral to what the team is trying to do and help people be empowered to be as effective as they can in their particular role, and creating collaborative spaces, collaborative environments.
Yeah. I was just going to say, can I just say, and I said earlier, I'm not a manager. I hate the word manager. I hate it. I hate that people, so many of the women entrepreneurs that I work with, they don't hire people. And so they do a lot of things themselves because they don't feel like they're good managers. They don't want to manage people. I'm like, I don't want to manage people either. That sounds awful. Like, who wants to be managed? I think it's such a oppressive way of running a business. And it just like gives me a total guttural ugh reaction. I was recently in a role that I wanted to be a leader in the role, and I found myself managing. And it was like getting information from the top, getting information from the bottom. They're not talking to each other. And all it was this big go between. I was like, this is not leading. If this is what managed this, I'm out. And I didn't last very long. Again, second time. So it's interesting you're calling it change management and we don't call it change facilitation.
Yeah. And when personally, I call it change navigation. So we're figuring out how to chart these waters that are unpredictable and may have some rough roads ahead. And we're trying to find peaceful places. So I'm a very visual person. So I use a lot of visual language when I'm talking to groups or when I'm working with teams. So, but I call myself a facilitator when we're in a team role. And usually if there's a team lead, we'll talk about, I'm facilitating this particular discussion. You're my co-facilitator and co-collaborator in this. And just changing that little bit of language makes a huge difference. Because I totally agree with you that because management in business settings quite often is seen as a dirty word anyway, because you've got to report something to the manager. You're going to get written up by the manager. There's a lot of negativity already around that, a negative consequence around that. So it's not that you're avoiding the terminology. It's building a description that is actually more relevant to what it is.
Yeah.
So you're not managing. That's why it's comical. You're not, during change and change process, you're not managing anything. You're trying to figure out how to create a map through uncharted territory.
Yeah.
So that's why I like navigate. That's the word I use a lot.
That's a great term. I love that. Okay. So you mentioned earlier, it's really about this idea of psychological safety. And first, I think addressing like, why is change cause so much upheaval and so much discomfort in organizations, in teams? I think that would be a good place to start.
Okay. And also I want to put a little definition around when we talk about teams, because every professional endeavor or a personal endeavor, whether you're a family system, anything that is a system is potentially identified as a team. So if you're a solo entrepreneur, you've got teammates. You've got somebody that helps you with your bookkeeping. You've got a banker. You've got a confidant. You've got somebody you bounce ideas off most of the time. There may probably some unique cases. If you're a small business owner, your team may be you, your lead, your manager, and your bookkeeper. But you have some sort of collaborative
team
piece to what you're doing. So that's a team.
Yeah.
And in most cases, those of us that find ourselves as the accidental CEO of what we're doing, we're the team lead in those cases. Or as a leader, you're leading a team and you have a second in command or whatever. That's, you want to lead them by example as well. So most leaders are taught, whether they've been to business school or just in the context of another job or books they've read, they've taught about leading by example from the standpoint of process management, process control. And this is the part that's really missing. Most leaders are not taught how to develop people, not even how to develop themselves from a people standpoint, but how to help others develop and step into their own skills and talents and own aspects of their personality and things like that. So this is where this whole concept of psychological safety comes in and has become, especially, like I said, the past 4 or 5 years since COVID, understanding how relevant and how important it really is within organizations. So there's a woman from out of Harvard. Her name's Amy Edmondson, and she's written several books. She has a great podcast, and I can mention those at the end of the episode, or we can include them in the episode notes. But she did a study. She started this whole research area of psychological safety back at I think it was the late 90s, early 2000s. So it's been around for a while in terms of a developing area of literature and application. But she did a huge project right at the tail end of COVID when organizations had been remote or basically shut down and they were coming back into a completely new world. Some companies had completely gone belly up, or they had merged with another company, another organization. They were working internationally in ways they never had before. People were wearing a lot of hats they never had before. So this change management process was super relevant, but was finally getting the acknowledgement that it needed to be looked completely differently than it ever had before. So she worked with Google, was one of the big groups, but it was called Project Aristotle. So if you Google Project Aristotle, you'll get a lot of great information up around that. And they looked at, I'm going to say, I thought I had this in my notes, but I've not seen it. I think it was almost 200 teams. And I think that was just within Google itself. And excuse me if I get this data a little bit wrong, but what came out of this, so change management of old said that it was all about the only people aspect that was focused on was aligning the person specifically with the task they were assigned. So task alignment, like there's a whole area, as you've probably heard of task analysis or job task analysis, JTA. That is a whole area that I've built whole segments of my consulting business just around job task analysis, aligning the person with the task or the job. So in teams, it was thought that the way a team can be most effective is if each team member is aligned perfectly with their role. And that's what change management was. A huge team shuffling is what they call it. Like shuffle a deck of cards. So you shuffle the team and you figure out which team member goes with which task the best way. And you may have to reshuffle and reshuffle. Like I was brought in as a consultant dozens of times to reshuffle teams. How do we realign our teams? Because our task completion is not great.
I would imagine that would create a whole lot of uncertainty.
Oh my gosh. That's where I'm going next with this. So hang on.
If you want to create anxiety in a lot of people, just make everything uncertain.
Hang on to that because that's where I want to go next because you are spot on. Spot on. So Amy took in the study, they took all these sort of old school ideas about change and they compared them to this whole concept of psychological safety. And psychological safety, there's quite a few dynamics to it, but from her research. But think of it this way. If you have an environment that you know in an honest way, a mindful way is pretty much judgment free, curiosity is encouraged, true feedback, regardless if it's considered negative, positive, off base, collaborative feedback is essential. And any idea is a good idea, meaning that you bring that to the table, bounce it off the group, and it's considered. It may not be relevant to the task at hand. It may not be relevant to the particular point in time, but it's considered. So that's sort of core concepts of psychological safety. So across all of these teams, I mean, almost 100% of the time, the teams that were considered the most effective in terms of results and output had nothing to do with what they considered fail rate, like more reports. And actually, more failure was reported in these effective teams than others. But it's because those teams marked really high on psychological safety, meaning they were way more willing to step forward with a true, I think this sucks. I think we failed. I think this is not going to work. And so those teams that actually reported more failure and rated as high for psychological safety were exponentially more effective and cohesive. Like there were no team changeovers. They were not losing people. They were not having to shuffle the team deck. They stayed consistent. And here's the interesting piece, because this is something actually I did a lot in my past in the kind of teamwork that I would do. It had nothing, the effectiveness had almost zero to do with alignment with person and task. Meaning it didn't matter what your skill level was. It didn't matter what your background was. It didn't matter what your ethnicity was. It didn't matter what your role had previously been in the company. If you were in a team that was collaborative, honest, judgment free, and you felt psychologically safe, the team was going to perform better.
Well, and if
Across
it's
the board.
okay to try and you're safe to try, I imagine that their skill level increased for whatever task they were on because there was the
Exactly.
space to get good at something.
Well, what you find in any groups, and this is true if you're working with kiddos or if you're working with adults, when you have a group that is truly collaborative, you will discover unnoticed or unknown skill sets that a person may have. Like it will come out that this person has, this was a recent example I have. So there was a team that had been together for a while. There was one person that had been with a particular company for over 20 years. And she was always kind of seen as like the creative of a group. She could write well. She had sort of out there ideas that they could bring it into sort of the bubble of whatever they were working on. Well, so she was the go-to for that sort of thing. And there was a guy that was part of this particular team that he was seen as the analytical. He was the very process oriented. He could break things down into flow charts. He could take her narrative, creative stuff and put it in a step by step. And he was really good at that. Well, somebody else in the group had actually noticed that this guy was a really good writer. Like they had read some of his personal things, like he had written some poetry. And so I had this idea, and this, not my genius or anything, it just sort of occurred to me from grouping experience with this particular team in the past, is to put those two together the next time that we had to write something that was training oriented, put those two together and tag team the writing of it, the creation of it. And they created a training manual together that was one of the best, well-written, most instructional, but also fun to read and fun to teach that I have ever seen. Because they were both great at what they did in isolation. But when you put those two things together in a collaborative, honest, helpful, fun environment, it created a product that nobody had ever seen before. That was more helpful and useful than anything that had ever been produced by that team. And it's that kind of thing that happens very often when you have a group of people that feel very empowered to speak their truth without judgment, where the feedback is honest and is collaborative and is pointed toward a direction based on value, based on growth, based on overall success, not just individual success. That's the kind of results you get. And, the research supports it and the outcome supports it. So this has become more and more important as we're navigating some really uncharted territory within businesses. Small businesses are feeling this just as much as corporations. We live in very uncertain times right now. So segue into uncertainty. Can you kind of say again what you said a while ago about uncertainty?
Oh, just that if you want to create anxiety in a group, like just start changing things up and keep reshuffling the deck. And you're going to create all kinds of uncertainty and anxiety.
Exactly.
And people worry about like, am I going to have a job? Am I not going to have a job? Like now I have to do, it's like, I could imagine that's like starting over your first day of work over and over and over and over again, because you don't know what your task is. You don't know how to do it. Someone may not have trained you on it. Suddenly you're doing your task and other people's tasks. And I have so much compassion for what people are going through, especially as you're hearing all the layoffs that are happening right now currently. So one of the things, though, that I think is really supportive is really, I think the thing that you've probably piqued people's interest around is, okay, how do I? Like you've proven that we need these collaborative, supportive, judgment-free, mindfulness practicing teams and corporate companies. How do I create that? And I know I have some tools in my tool belt. You have some tools in your tool belt, but where do you want to take that?
Well, let's start with that uncertainty piece, first of all, because this is something that has not been addressed enough and it continues. And right now is more like you were talking about job loss and job fluctuation and companies losing their funding and projects losing their funding, people having to wear lots of hats. So I have this in my notes, but I'm not finding it right now. There's a researcher that has this concept of with change, because the core piece of change and navigating change is dealing with uncertainty. That's what change is all about. You have a past way it's done, you have a future initiative, and everything in the middle is uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And we as humans are not wired well to deal with uncertainty. In fact, it causes biochemical changes in our brain when we're uncertain,
Mm-hmm.
when we have this fear of the unknown. It shuts down portions of the prefrontal cortex, which have to do with emotional regulation, what have to do with logic and reasoning. So think about it this way. We're basically asking people to be in a creative space, logic and reasoning, come up with tasks, complete tasks, when our brain is shutting down that piece that does that.
Yep.
So a big thing that we can all work on is learning to acknowledge when we're in those places of uncertainty and it's being driven by fear of the unknown. Because most of us, when we're left with a gap in our brain and there's a possibility of a negative outcome, guess what we're going to hyper focus on? That possibility of a negative outcome, whether it's job loss or reduction of salary or having to take on tasks I'm not equipped for or worthiness issues popping in. So mindfulness can help us track back to a place of being curious about what's going on without the judgment and bringing compassion in for ourselves and for others to cut everybody, including yourself, some slack. This is a difficult situation. There is a way to get through it. Panicking is not going to help. Those simple internal statements and statements to others can be hugely helpful, because when you say, okay, panicking is not going to help, you may take that, okay, I'm judging. That's a negative statement. That's correcting somebody. But no, it's putting out there a fact. Us driving this with fear, us driving this with the energy of catastrophe is not helpful.
Yep. So one of the tools that I think is really supportive for figuring out what that fear driver is in the immunity to change process, which is what I use with individuals that I coach. But a lot of people don't realize that you can also use this on teams. So I've also have learned to facilitate this on teams, where essentially what immunity to change is, if you don't know, is it's a process of going through and figuring out some sort of change goal and determining what is the thought, the assumption, the big assumption underneath that makes it so that change feels unsafe. And so there you go through a process of relearning what else could be true, what other possibilities are available to you. But these assumptions that you make as an individual drive your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and undermine that change goal. Well, the same thing happens inside of organizations. The organization has a culture. They have big assumptions about this is how it goes. And so the company, as a kind of living, breathing organism, starts operating under these assumptions, and it controls the behavior that undermines the change goals of the organization. And then each individual's sort of big assumptions influence that. So there's a whole process of getting underneath and figuring out what is the culture, what is the big assumptions that are running or operating inside of that team that are undermining everything. So that's one option or tool that's available that I just want to throw out and mention. Obviously, it's more than I can do in a podcast, but awareness is half the battle. It's even knowing a tool exists. Yep. And there are facilitators, myself. I think you're individual. But there are facilitators, myself included, that are trained to facilitate these immunity change mapping process to diagnose those underlying things that are creating the fear and the uncertainty.
Yep. I use components of that immunity to change training that you and I did together all the time, and aspects from the book, which I'll list that book as one of the book resources as well. I use it a lot in groups, in corporate settings, and in small business settings as well. One of the things along those lines that also I think is a key aspect of this, that I will encourage people to do some self-study and to ask questions. You can send them in through the resource that you provide for the group, for the podcast. But a key aspect of change going from one thing to another that we, in professional settings, we completely disregard, even though everyone knows it's relevant, is grief and dealing with grief. Because change involves some sense of loss, some sense of getting over, some sense of getting beyond. And that's what the grieving process really is about. And so there is an aspect of that is left out of most conversations within the change navigation process. So getting comfortable having conversations that may seem more emotional based or may seem more warm and fluffy and not necessarily professional, again, using air quotes, is hugely important for leaders that want to be effective at helping their groups, helping their companies, helping their teams navigate change.
Yeah, there's such a departure of empathy
Yes.
that is missing significantly in our business culture. And this whole topic today, I would put it under the category of relational capacity. So when we talk about capacity, some different pillars of capacity that I work with, the relational capacity piece and how you interact with others is something that cannot be outsourced to AI.
Amen. Preach.
And so I see this as such a relevant and important conversation to say, like, you've got to get so good and hold such relational capacity and be able to interact with other human beings and have a level of empathy that isn't just calculated based on some algorithm of how you're supposed to react, but pick up on the nuances, and you will build such stronger connections and bonds that I think that is the thing that cannot be outsourced, is the leadership.
Yeah. Having the capacity for compassion and an honest approach to what people are truly going through. And not only a leader that can acknowledge because resistance is another key aspect of change. So, but resistance in the past has always been confronted. It's a confrontational element. It's like my way or the highway. There's statements all around effective leadership through change. And a lot of it has to do, there's a point in time where you have to say, here's the way it's going to be if you do this or leave. Well, the compassionate approach to leadership through change is much more about looking at resistance as an opportunity. Resistance is an opportunity to learn. So you ask questions like, what do they see different than I do? What did they feel different than I do? Everybody else is on board, but they are still, or this team is still, this group is still, this department is still resisting this change initiative. Look at that as an opportunity. So when we can remove these trigger-loaded judgments of some of these things in the past have been construed as bad or negative and look at it as an opportunity, it becomes a completely different dynamic. It becomes truly a place where there's collaboration and the possibility of finding missing pieces that no one else is seeing.
Yeah.
So it's like,
don't you think that when someone is willing to come alongside someone who is feeling, my experience is coming alongside someone who is being resistant and truly taking the time to understand their position, you will create a loyal person who many times, not always, but if they really, like, if you truly have the same common goal, if you really are on the same side. And I think that a lot of times people are on the same side, but the way through is scary and uncomfortable. And so it can look like you're opposing forces. And so you can create, when someone finally feels seen and heard and understood, it was never about the change at all. It was about feeling safe.
yeah, exactly.
And you will have like the most loyal person that has your back.
Yep.
And they would do anything for you.
It's so interesting that this made me think of a few years ago, a company I was working with. So any side of collaborative, whether it's a training development group or it's a team initiative or team exercise, I always finish all that with some sort of debrief. and I call it a download. So we're going to download what we just went through, like everybody's collaboration. I kind of have a pattern for it, but it changes every time depending on what the activity was, what the group is like. When it started becoming very obvious that I could start bringing language into corporate settings like compassion and self-compassion. So I started calling it, we're going to have a compassion driven download after this. And I would explain kind of what that high level, what that looked like. I had a group that I worked with many times before, and the only thing I changed in our process was starting to use the word compassion. And a group that had been very cohesive and very collaborative, a really good and effective group, a psychologically safe group. We had a particular session. The download was more emotion based, like a person cried in the group, a person shared something personal that was going on in their life that was affecting them within the group, which everybody else knew about, but nobody had talked about. So it would almost became like a group session to some degree. There was a component of that, but it was steered around what they were trying to accomplish as this group. And afterwards, I had two people of this 8-person team come to me individually and say, I learned something today about that person that I did not know in the 10 years that I've worked with them. That is incredibly helpful, not only in our job, but incredibly helpful in me understanding and being able to relate to some of the things I was always kind of like, why did they do it that way? Why did they make those decisions? So it was so interesting to me that just changing a little piece of language of compassion, which must have, my only thought is it opened a gateway of permission to share maybe on a deeper level or to relate on a deeper level. But it became very obvious that not only something a few years ago in corporate setting would be considered completely inappropriate for the setting was not only appropriate, it was highly needed to be for that team to be as effective as they possibly could be. So for somebody that's the bean counter that wants to say, okay, well, what does that have to do with anything? It's like, okay, watch the product.
Yeah.
Watch what's going to come out of this. It is obvious that there was a shift in a very good way that was going to affect this team dynamic in a very positive, productive way.
I'm just thinking in my head, I'm noticing I'm having like some heartache thoughts, something around like, when did we become so much about the bottom line that we just stopped caring about people? And like the loyalty went away. People used to work for the same company. I think my grandfather worked for the same company for, it might have been 50 years, something like that,
Wow.
like 40 years. It was so long. Like, I know that's a really long time. And that's not how things are. And people don't bond the same way that they used to. There's profit over people now.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about the kinds of organizations that are just blow your mind are the ones that really put people first. And I mean, how much money does one really need? And the disparity between the CEOs and higher paid executives and what people who work that are doing the labor make, and how that has widened so much. And you're talking about earlier about grief. And it's like, I kind of grieve that for mankind, that disparity has become so far from each other because it's created so much discord and disconnect. And my gosh, when are we the happiest? When we're like really connecting with the people we truly care about and love, and when we're working towards a common goal and you're linking arms with people and making a difference and working towards a mission. And that is so void in our working culture now. And that's why I love small business owners. That's why I love entrepreneurs. That's why I love, and I don't want to see all the wealth go to big corporations. It's not that I'm anti-big corporation, but I like, it's hard to run a big corporation and really create that same culture.
Yeah. We're to a place, and this is somewhat opinion, but I think it's also has some fact fueling it. We're to a place where a lot of small to mid-sized businesses, the dynamic is shifting to where the level of importance is being reaffirmed for small and mid-sized businesses. And a lot of that, hopefully, emphasis of the big corporations and the big dollar corporations are completely steering the direction is starting to shift. And a lot of this comes down to the redefining of success. So we've talked a lot about and did our retreat on the dynamic among people that hold some of the power has changed a lot and is continuing to change, where their definition of success is not about the high dollars that they're getting as their golden parachute or whatever. It's about passion in what they do. It's about a sense of freedom, a sense of helping. There's some of those things. Now, I don't know how long all these shifts will take to implement or to truly be able to see visible changes, but I am seeing it personally in my business with corporate cultures, with groups that are, okay, I'll get questions like, I'm trying to think of a good one because some of them have been pretty profound recently. Questions like, okay, how do we make sure this is an environment where people feel safe? Like things like that. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was never brought up. Maybe by an individual in a one-on-one kind of setting, but how do we change a culture? How do we create messaging in what we say to our new hires so that they immediately want to ask more questions and be more engaged? How do we hire people and make sure they don't leave because it costs us too much to retrain every time we have a turnover? That's the approach I used to get. The things I'm starting to hear are, how do we attract quality people that want to stay here for all the right reasons?
Yeah.
So
I love that.
I'm trying to leverage the hope in that in some ways. And that's one of the reasons I'm going through my own business rebranding, because it feels like it's time to pull in the customers, align with the customers and clients that really are about effective, compassion-driven change.
Yeah.
So
I don't have the answers to that. It's just, I feel like I just opened a whole can of worms. Hopefully it inspires you to keep tuning into the podcast, because I think we've got a lot more in our regular episodes and in these Mindfulness Matters episodes to unpack and think about and talk about, because if not for creating joy and living a good life, what are we here for? Okay, so kind of to wrap it around here, we're already at time. I feel like, again, we could talk so much longer, and maybe this becomes a series, but what would you leave someone with to think about who wants to be more mindful in the way that they bring change to their team? We've talked about why it's important and maybe some strategy that they could look into. But what would you leave someone with? Questions to ask themselves, or how do they be more mindful about change in team?
just remember that true and effective change and lasting change comes from the inside out, not the other way around. So it's less about trying to identify and refine an effective process and more about developing people and supporting people and including supporting yourself.
Yeah.
And from my standpoint, that support comes from a place of mindfulness and compassion.
Yeah. I think that's why I'm so, like, I want to scream from the mountaintops. I don't know if you feel this way, but I want to scream from the mountaintops. Like, everybody needs to do the kind of work that we promote on this podcast, the inner work. And it's so difficult because there's not a great marketing approach to saying just the right thing. I've always find myself very challenged with anything that would try to communicate the result that you get from doing this work, the marketing tactic that makes someone pay attention, the right hook to use, because it's not expand your portfolio to 200 doors, make 25,000 in the next 30 days. Like, it's not that. It's the long game.
Yes.
And
exactly.
It's about fulfillment and the sustainability of your business so you don't burn out. And it's all those kind of tangible, subjective things. Like, what do you want your life to look like? How do you want to feel? How do you want business to feel?
How do you define success?
How do you define success? I can't put that on it for you, except to say this work is 80% of it. And
Exactly,
it
if
gets
not more.
prioritized 20%. And it drives me bonkers. And I'm trying to solve that problem. And so I just talk about it everywhere I can. That's all I can think to do. It's just like, be imperfect. Don't worry about getting it right. The people who need to hear the message will hear the message. But if you are not prioritizing, working on yourself, how you show up for your team, how do you build people up? How do you speak life over people and empower people? And that's not what you spend most of your time doing. You're missing the point.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. Yeah, I do think that this is segue for some more discussion around this. And maybe that's part of a mindful value related discussion too, because it's so related to this.
Yeah. So if that intrigues you, make sure you hit follow or subscribe. We put these out every single Tuesday, and join us for Podcast Club. It's like book club, but podcast club. So we come together, you get to meet other entrepreneurs. You don't always get the opportunity to just brainstorm with other people, meet people you've never met before, and really start to apply, not just listen and consume the podcast, but start to apply in real life what you are learning or what's coming up for you. And we don't ever know. Sometimes you take a nugget away from it that is completely unrelated to what we were talking about, but something we said was like brought an idea for you. So we want to hear about those things.
In some way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's at consciousedge.com/club. And with all of that being said, I am sending you so much love.
Be well, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Conscious Edge podcast. Make sure you subscribe and take a moment to be kind and share this episode with someone you care about. Leave a review to help us bring more compassionate leaders building businesses and creating wealth to the table. And for show notes, head over to consciousedge.com/podcast. This podcast and the linked materials are presented solely for general information, educational, and entertainment purposes and should not be taken as personal or medical advice or any kind of mental health treatment. Please consult a medical or mental health professional if you feel you need such services. Please be advised that all investing and entrepreneurial endeavors involve risk, and the use of the education and information on this podcast and linked materials is at the user's own risk.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.